Is there any world where Israel goes after Khomeini, goes after the theocratic leadership, tries to actually knock the head off the snake, as it were? Is that possible? Would that be supported by the US?
Well, that's a question. I'll answer the possibility and the practicalities of that. And all I would point to is the fact that we have seen extremely accurate, targeted, intelligence-led operations which have resulted in the killing of senior leadership. So in terms of the technicalities and would it be possible, I suppose it would be possible.
Be with you guys.
What is the mood as you perceive it this morning? The attack by Iran was deliberately indiscriminate, but it was unsuccessful. The defense systems held up. What sort of mood are you sensing among the people this morning?
The defense systems held up, but I also want to note just the strength of the coalition as well, with not only the partners of the United States, but the UK as well. I don't think there would be such a successful evening for Israel if it wasn't with its international partners. And that's what Israel really needs to focus on right now. And as we wake up here, even though no one was necessarily injured or there's not many reports of injuries, there is still significant damage throughout the entire country, specifically here in central Israel. I'm in Tel Aviv. In some of the suburbs, there is reports of significant damage. So that's what people are waking up to, cleaning up the damage, making sure that everyone is okay. But it does just go to note the impressive nature of Israel's defense systems and the home front command instructions, because some residents, they were in a bomb shelter for some 40 minutes last night as these hundreds of ballistic missiles rained overhead, and you could hear the explosions of those interceptions shaking the bomb shelters even as you were underground. And so I think that is also why we didn't see as many injuries, because people listened to those instructions from Israel and took shelter and hid out there for nearly an hour as those missiles rained overhead.
So what happens next is the question on everyone's mind. You won't know the answer to that. No one really knows precisely what Benjamin Netanyahu will do. He's known to be belligerent and cautious in almost the same breath when it comes to military action. He is riding a wave, though. There's been 2 weeks of military and intelligence successes in Israel. The pager attacks, the walkie-talkie attacks. There's been missiles in Yemen. There's been the ground incursion into Lebanon. Are you expecting something significant being directed against Iran? Is that what the talk is?
That's what the talk certainly is. The Security Cabinet in Israel met last night. They convened. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sending a strong message to Iran, stating that this will come with consequences and that Israel is preparing exactly what that might look like. Obviously, it's all reports and we don't have a crystal ball, but could that be attacking some of the oil infrastructure, really hitting the delicate infrastructure in Iran? That's what some of these reports are stating, especially right now as all of the international partners, specifically the United States and the UK, who helped defend Israel, right now they're still defending them with their words, stating that Israel has a right to defend itself against the threat of Iran. And so as we're hearing this strong messaging coming out of the Israeli security apparatus, it does seem like there's going to be some sort of a response. They can't let 180 ballistic missiles fly overhead. Even if the damage and injuries was not as significant as Iran might have hoped for, that's still not something that this country can let happen without sending a strong response. And all the meanwhile, as we do wait for that possible response in Iran, Israel's still battling all of the other fronts, just as you mentioned. Today alone in the north, there were some 50 rockets already fired towards northern Israel from Lebanon. And we're seeing the IDF calling on other residents in southern Lebanon to continue to evacuate their homes as they're pounding the south of Lebanon as well. So, as I say, it's quiet relatively here when we wake up in central Israel. The northern front is a totally different scene. And unfortunately, we've been seeing this scene for months. But really, these past 2 weeks have been utter change up there. And it seems like that change will continue as well.
Nicole, great to speak to you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us. That's Nicole Zedek, their reporter for I24 News, bringing you the latest from Tel Aviv. And now we spoke to Peter Lerner from Israel's IDF, and he told us that anyone who attacks Israel would pay dearly. But how? What are the options for Israel? What does escalation mean? Is the Middle East being reshaped before our eyes over the course of the next few days? We've got to remember that there is a lame duck president in America. American influence will be less. You have to imagine there's 33 days till the next American election, where everything could change again depending on who wins. It feels like everything is very volatile and up in the air. So trying to get an expert analysis is more important than ever. Let's speak to General Sir John McCall, former Deputy Supreme Commander for NATO. He's also served in Iraq and Afghanistan. John, good morning to you.
Good morning.
How dangerous a time is this, do you feel, in terms of the future of the Middle East, the future of any form of hopes for stability in the area?
Well, as other commentators have said, and other people you've interviewed said, it's very dangerous and precarious. We've heard Benjamin Netanyahu say that he will mount a strong response. Other Israeli officials say exactly the same thing. I think really importantly, we heard from the White House yesterday, Jake Sullivan, the US National Security Advisor, and I'm quoting here, he said, "Want to make clear there will be consequences, severe consequences, and we will work with Israel to make sure that is the case." Now, that is in contrast to the language used back in April, when, having defended successfully against an Iranian attack, the US encouraged Israel to demonstrate restraint, and the phrase "bank the win" was being bandied around. This time, the language coming out of America, usually encouraging restraint from Israel, is far more bullish. And if that is the case, I think we will see a significant response from Israel.
And what will that mean, in your view? It will mean a direct attack on Iranian soil. Presumably, could it mean going after missile installations? Could it mean going after the nuclear program? How far do you think it could go?
Well, I think initially it will focus on military targets, and that will begin, I would have thought, with the air defense systems, and then go on to the missile installations. But then beyond that, I think there is the possibility that we'll move on to oil infrastructure, key infrastructure, other infrastructure elements, and then potentially on to the nuclear infrastructure as well. So the potential expansion here is really significant, and it's difficult also to see where it ends. I mean, violence begets violence without any political objective, and at the moment it's difficult to see how you move beyond simply a reaction, a counter-reaction, violence and more violence.
Well, it's an interesting point, that, because Netanyahu went on television yesterday and the day before, talking about regime change in Iran, talking about a day in which Persia, as he put it, and Israel will live together. Is there any world where Israel goes after Khomeini, goes after the theocratic leadership, tries to actually knock the head off the snake, as it were? Is that possible? Would that be supported by the US?
Well, that's a question. I'll answer the possibility and the practicalities of that, and all I would point to is the fact that we have seen extremely accurate, targeted, intelligence-led operations which have resulted in the killing of senior leadership. So in terms of the technicalities and would it be possible, I suppose it would be possible. Having said that, the security arrangements around that leadership will be extremely tight. So potentially possible. As to whether or not that level of support would come from the United States is something that you should address to a US politician rather than to somebody with a military background in the UK.
Do you think, as a person with a military background has to work with politicians, it is striking that we have a president who's not going to be there in a couple of months' time. We've got a regime change possible in the US, with Donald Trump being a very different figure to Kamala Harris. That must be impacting Netanyahu's thinking, mustn't it? That it doesn't feel that any restraint, even if the US wanted to exercise it, and maybe they don't, it's not going to be there as much today as it would have been, say, a couple of years ago, you wouldn't imagine.
No, I have to say, the traction that I think it's been demonstrated actually over the last 11 months, since the October the 7th attacks, that the traction that the US has with the Israeli politicians has been limited, and more limited than in the past. And I guess that as we move towards a general election, that is increasingly the case. I was in Israel about 3 weeks ago, and had the privilege of having a discussion with Mr. Netanyahu. And there is absolutely no doubt that he is determined to do all that he can to provide security for the people of Israel. And he sees the path to that as including a significant military response. So going back to your question, do I think that the constraints and control and traction that the US has is all that it has been in the past? I do not think that is the case. And I think that Mr. Netanyahu may take advantage of that.
He's had a good couple of weeks, it's fair to say. do you think, Netanyahu, from a military point of view? Look, the questions of morality and politics around Israel are there to be debated by many people, and they will continue to be so. But from a purely military point of view, the pager attack, the walkie-talkie attack, they've gone into Yemen on the Houthis. They are going to do something to Iran. Iran looks impotent in the world opinion because it's fired these rockets, these missiles, and the Israeli defense has held up. It feels that militarily there's a lot of momentum with Israel. Is that fair?
I think it is fair. I mean, since October the 7th, when the Israelis had 1,200 killed and 250 held hostage, they have actually been under attack from 4 other areas as well. So they've been from Gaza, there's Hamas, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Houthis in Yemen, militias in Syria, and then finally from Iran. And they have countered those and countered them well. I mean, you have to pay respect to the IDF in the way that they've handled it. In particular, I think the way in which they've gone up against the very significant threat of Hezbollah. Since the 8th of October, Hezbollah have launched, I think it's 9,000 missiles into Israel. So they had to do something, and they've done it, and they've done it extremely effectively. So yes, I think militarily they are on the front foot, and that will encourage Mr. Netanyahu.
Yeah, and what that encouragement leads to is the question we're all wanting to find the answer to. John, good to speak to you. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you.
That's General Sir John McCall, former Deputy Supreme Commander for NATO. He's also served in Iraq and Afghanistan.